excited to welcome Emily this evening. Emily is a registered dietitian and earned her master's degree in nutrition and dietetics at the University of Utah. As a certified food and nutrition expert, she utilizes evidence-based medicine and nutritional therapy. She is passionate about helping people and works closely with patients to develop personal nutrition plans and assess dietary intake, adequacy, and nutrition needs. She is also the mother of two children, a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old. So she is very much living what she is teaching. So we are excited to welcome you, Emily, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen so you guys can see what I'm seeing. All right, can everybody see that okay? Worked the last time. Okay, great. So I titled this little talk, it's Cultivating a Competent Eater, because if you have kids, you know that nothing is really quick fixes and nothing is instantaneous. It's all about growth and the process that things take. And so as we kind of talk about this, and in keeping with the safe space, like there really are no hard and fast lines, and there's no, moment by moment successes and failures. It's just kind of the growth as this process happens over time. And whenever I meet with patients, I say we're in it for the long game, right? Like we don't, what happens next week and next month is important, but not near as important as what happens, in 10 or 15 years. And that's really what the focus is on. And sometimes it's hard to have that macro vision when you're like really in the weeds and you're like, it's just asparagus. It's really good. You should eat it. But that is the goal, right? Is the long term. So let's see. There we go. Okay. Woo. All right. So I want to do a little thing where we kind of do a word cloud. So let's see. I want to make sure we can all still see this. And we're gonna, let's see. Make sure I can do this. Oh gosh, it took me to the wrong thing. Okay, never mind. We're gonna backtrack. Well, if you guys wouldn't mind putting in the comments just things that are our goals for our kids, right? So what do we want for our kids in regards to eating? Common thing I often hear is to eat more vegetables, but I know that's not the only goal that we have. Would anyone mind sharing in the comments?
Emily, just to clarify, do you want us to put it in the chat or do you want us to text?
Put it in the chat and let's make sure I can see the chat. Yeah, there we go. Trying as many new flavors as possible, open to trying new things. Yeah, those are two really big things, right? We don't want our kids to just be stuck in this very limited, limited palate, only eating like chicken nuggets and grilled cheese. We want them to be able to eat a variety of different foods. Some other goals we might have for our kids can be, making sure that they can maintain a healthy weight throughout their life, making sure that they have a positive relationship with food, and that they're not just, being stressed about food their whole life, like we see so many people doing. Some of the other ones, eating a balanced diet, more than pasta and dairy. Yep. You see those 2 and 3-year-olds, especially, sometimes it gets much older than that, on a white diet where they only want to eat white and yellow foods, not having to eat a 6th dinner before bed. Yeah, definitely. Having kids eat dinner together with the family, having, all of these things, they're important goals. And there's so many of them, it can be a little bit overwhelming. All these things that we want for our kids. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm getting in the hang of this. I'm using a new presenting platform. So what doesn't work? There's a lot of things that don't work with feeding kids. One of the things that definitely doesn't work is dieting. When there's a much greater percentage of kids that are obese and overweight. And if yours is one of them, like, you really should not feel bad or like you're doing anything wrong. But dieting, for sure, it doesn't work for adults and it doesn't work for kids. Other things that don't work can include bribery. Bribing kids can work for certain things, especially like really concrete tasks. But eating is actually a pretty complex behavior when we start to think about it. Even if you think about, just all the different things there are to learn about on that plate of food that you offered your kid, let's say you just have, chicken and mashed potatoes and broccoli. Think about all the different textures and the different flavors and the different temperatures that are involved with that plate of food. It seems so simple, but it is really a pretty complex behavior. So bribery is a little bit trickier because it's not just a one and done thing. It's not you did this, then you get this, because we're asking them to exhibit and show a lot of different learned behaviors. Restricting tends to backfire on us as well, right along with dieting. If you have ever met a kid who has never ever had sugar in their life, they might have a tendency to go way overboard when they're offered sugar. And that, it's a lot easier to control what they have access to when they're 2 and 3. But when they get a little bit older, I've heard stories from parents where they just eat tons of candy when they get access to it, not at home. And if we can't teach our kids how to eat pizza and live in the world that we live in, then are we really accomplishing our job as parents? Of course, if they lived in a perfect world, they would only eat perfect things. But unfortunately, McDonald's is way too easy, and we have to learn how to manage that, and so do our kids. So this is one of my favorite pictures of my daughter. She's 3 now, but this is when she was about 7 months old, and she was just learning. She was just starting to try solids. I just love the joy that is on that sweet little face. That she was having a ball, and food was just so fun and such a joy. And she didn't think about her weight. She didn't think about how much she needed to grow. She didn't think about, really anything. It was fun to squish, and it was fun to put in her mouth, and it was fun to throw everywhere, as you can clearly see. Kids are natural intuitive eaters, which means that they're really good at regulating their hunger and fullness. If you've ever tried to get an 18-month-old to eat more food than they want, then chances are you probably got it in your face or on the floor, because when they don't want more, they just stop eating more. And it's this really beautiful thing that kids are really much better at than we are as adults. The problem is that we feel like, and a lot of parents feel that if we just let our kids eat however they wanted, well, then we'd be having ice cream and cupcakes, breakfast, lunch, and dinner with a side of Gushers and sugary cereal. And that's obviously not what we can do and not what we want, and wouldn't allow our kids to grow in the way that we need them to. So how do we balance, this beautiful innate ability that they have to regulate hunger and fullness and to feel that and grow? Most kids are really quite good at growing. There are kids that aren't, and we can talk about that if you have one of those kids, but most kids are pretty good at growing. It's just, we want to make sure that we're providing the best nutrition possible and helping them move towards reaching all of those goals, right? All of those things of being able to eat a variety of foods, enjoying different foods, being able to maintain their weight, all those things. Okay, so the way that we accomplish this is through what's called the division of responsibility. So we separate the jobs that parents have, and we utilize, of course, the intelligence that we have and the knowledge about nutrition that we're able to use. And then we allow kids to keep doing their job that they're so good at, of eating intuitively, of knowing how much they want to eat and how much they need to eat. So parents' jobs are what, when, and where, and kids get to decide if and how much. So let's break this down a little bit. And let me give a little bit of an explanation about the how much. So I think sometimes that can be a little bit unsettling, that we're just going to let kids decide how much they want to eat. It's really difficult to determine and estimate how much food a kid actually needs on a given day. Kids aren't particularly consistent in their intake. You might have, especially as they're younger, they might eat, let's say that their average needs are about 1,200 calories, that they might eat 800 calories one day and 2,000 calories the next day. And it doesn't seem like there's any particular rhyme or reason about why that's happening. And that's actually really quite normal for kids, is to vary that intake. But if we look at it over a longer period of time, it averages out really well. As kids get older and they're involved in more things, one day they might have an active day at school and they might have sports and they might have been, a little bit stressed. And then the next day could just be like a really chill day. Their needs are going to be really different on those days. And it's really difficult for us as parents and even as, a healthcare provider to determine what each day is going to look like and how much that kid is going to need. And so when we really try to be strict about determining how much food our kids should have, we run the risk of underfeeding them some days and overfeeding them other days. And that kind of pushes them out of sync with those intuitive signals. And they start to rely on those external cues that we're giving them instead of their internal hunger and fullness cues, which really are the only things that they're going to carry through the whole lives. And we want to teach them how to respond to that and pay attention to that. So let's go back to the parents. So the what, when, and where. Those are the parents' responsibility. So what means you decide what's offered. An example of where this is not happening is when the kid demands to have, I use chicken nuggets as an example because it seems like even really, really picky kids will eat chicken nuggets. Sometimes only specific brands of chicken nuggets, but they'll eat them. But, say your kid demands that they're going to eat chicken nuggets and that's all they want and they're not going to have it. That's actually not up to the kid. It's not their responsibility. It's yours as the parent. You also get to decide when meals and snacks are served. So this usually in practice means that we don't do grazing and that the kitchen is closed otherwise. And then where we eat. So you get to decide, and usually this is hopefully, once again, in a perfect world. And I think, as far as parenting goes, if we're hitting like 60 or 70%, then we round up and say that we're doing it all the time because it's not always pretty and it's definitely not always perfect. But where we would hope would be at the dinner table, sitting down. And kids get to decide if they want to eat something and how much. So in practice, one of the first things when we're implementing this division of responsibility is to have regular meals and snacks. This is number one rule. So this is the parent's responsibility of the when and where as far as food goes. If we don't have regular meals and snacks, it's difficult for kids to regulate their hunger and fullness cues as well. So if you think about if you've ever had to shift, like when you had lunch, say, I'll just give an example from my own life. When I was staying home all the time with my toddler, she was on a pretty regular schedule. She would have breakfast at 7:30 and then we'd have a snack around 10:30 and then, around like 9:30. And then she'd be hungry for lunch around 11 or 11:30. So I got used to that kind of routine and I started being hungry for lunch around 10:45, which seems like a really early time to eat lunch. But then when I go to work, we have our lunch between 1 and 2. That's when that break in our patient schedule is. And so I find that it can be a little bit tricky to have that, very early schedule with my kid and then to have, a very different lunchtime schedule. And sometimes I get too hungry for lunch or I'm not hungry enough, and it gets a little bit out of sync. we want to try and keep that from happening to our kids. And we want to try and have regular meals so that they come to meals hungry, but not too hungry. When we're hungry, food sounds better, food tastes better, and we're kind of able to go from empty to full. When we're too hungry, well, there's a whole host of things that happen when we're too hungry that I'm sure you've all experienced. Being nauseous, certain foods not sounding good. Being hangry is a common complaint that I hear, especially when you've had a hangry little one. It can be a real event. So we want to prevent them from getting too hungry. And also, of course, we want them to be hungry when they come to meals. We also want to have regular snacks. Younger kids, and even a lot of older kids and adults can't go much more than 3 hours without eating something. And if it's been longer than 5 hours, it's probably been too long. So kids under around 8, they need to have at least probably 2 snacks a day, having a snack in the mid-morning or having their breakfast and lunch really close together like some schools do. That allows them, once again, to come to meals hungry, but not too hungry, and to be able to fill up and be satisfied and then leave. Other than that, we want the kitchen to be closed. I find that for most families, the problems come not from meals, because meals are a little bit more planned. They are a little bit more structured. The problem comes from grazing outside of the meals, from having the open pantry and kids just kind of cycling in and out and picking out whatever sounds good in the moment. And when we have that, we have kids that don't come to meals hungry, which is where they get their main source of nutrition, right? You're not providing roasted or steamed vegetables at all times. But there might be, goldfish or, granola bars that are available much more often. And of course, we know that if kids choose more of those roasted vegetables and those whole grains, that they're going to have better nutrition. So we want to provide the opportunity where that is the easier choice, and there's not the opportunity to graze and fill up on those other snacks throughout the day. Along with that, we have parents get to choose the what is provided at meals. And we kind of talked about that, but we can't allow kids to be the only ones who determine what they want to eat. But especially with quite picky eaters, it's just not fair. As eating is such a skill and something that we learn over time, we want to provide them at least one safe food for each child at each meal. So if you have a really picky eater, but they're okay with bread, put bread on the table with dinner, and allow them to choose what foods that they're going to eat, and allow them to eat enough to fill up. This can sound really stressful and scary that, we're not forcing them to eat vegetables. We're not, encouraging them to, make sure that they're filling up on a variety of foods. But this is where we just really have to trust that forcing kids to eat is not the way we want to go. And that with given enough time and patience, and opportunity, that they will be able to learn to eat a variety of foods as long as they're provided. So we want to decrease the stress, because stress makes kids not want to eat and not be adventurous, right? If you're stressed and anxious and you feel like all this pressure is being put on you to try something new, it doesn't put you in an optimal headspace to learn to enjoy that thing. It just becomes a stressful thing. And that food is then associated with stress and discomfort. And we want food to be a really positive experience. We want trying new things to be fun and exciting instead of stressful and anxiety inducing. So we provide at least one safe food for your kid at each meal. And from there, we allow them to eat what they want to eat and say no to foods that they want to say no to. And they do become more adventurous over time. It just takes time. So the reason we know that this works is, well, we know that the opposite doesn't work. I think probably every adult can think of themselves or a friend who has a story about how they hate a certain vegetable because their parents forced them to eat it and they puked or they threw up or whatever, because it was such a stressful, anxiety-inducing experience. And we don't want our kids to have any of that. We don't want them to be stressed about that. So when we decrease stress at meals and snacks, it allows them to focus better on how much food they actually need. Because when we have those stress hormones, it makes it much harder to feel ghrelin and leptin, which are two of our hunger and satiety hormones. Okay, so we do want to make sure that we're offering a variety of foods, including foods that you like. Sometimes it's always a little sad to me when moms are like, I'd love to cook all these things, but no one will eat them. And of course, we don't want to waste food, but it's important to still cook a variety of foods because you want to be the one who's providing. So even if you provide a lovely variety of foods and your kid only eats the white and the yellow stuff, you can still check that box off that you did your job as a parent. You can also explain foods. So for example, some kids are really sensitive to different textures or different, even shapes of pasta. And you can say, oh, this is, yeah, see this pasta is bow tie pasta. It's like the spaghetti that you really like, but it's just shaped a little bit different. It's shaped like these fun bow ties. And you can explain it without saying, you're really going to like this. You've really got to eat this. Come on, just please try it. We also want to make sure that we don't cook separate meals for picky children. When we cook separate meals for children, that's when we start to see kind of downfalls and limitations in the variety of nutrition and nutrients that those kids are getting. Because a lot of kids, if you leave it up to them, they'll eat the same thing or the same couple of things every day. And it will look like mac and cheese or chicken nuggets or a hamburger or ramen, even if they've only had that once. Somehow it always ends up looking like that. One thing that can be helpful, especially with younger kids, is to serve meals separated. So not separate meals, but separated meals. So for example, if you're having tacos, a 2-year-old is probably not going to be able to eat a whole taco in its entirety, especially considering all the different textures and flavors and maybe even temperatures that are involved with that food. But if you can separate it out and you have your tortilla and maybe some meat and cheese and olives and whatever else you want to have on your taco, and you have them separated, it allows them to learn about those foods and to experience those foods and to figure out what they like without it being such a pressurized situation. Serving meals family style, not family size. I guess you want them to do family size too. Family style when kids are a little bit older allows them to serve themselves so that they can choose foods that they like, and maybe even as they continue to grow and learn, maybe even try some of those foods that they've been putting off or hadn't been trying or didn't like before without making a big deal of it. Just they can try and they can decide that they don't like it or decide that they do like it, and it doesn't have to be a big deal, right? When we try new things, often we don't want people to be watching us when we try them. We just want to be able to experience it and see from there. We also want to make sure that we're not limiting our kids' likes and dislikes. So we do that by providing a variety of foods and letting them choose. And we do that by just putting them on their plate. For some kids, this will induce a lot of anxiety, in which case, maybe we can put it on a separate plate or provide another plate for them to put the foods that they don't like. But giving them a chance to try it. I've seen families who will just not serve certain foods that their kids don't like because the parents are like, well, they don't like this, so why would I put it on their plate? Just totally valid, because we don't want to waste food, but then we're never giving our kids the opportunities to try. So I recommend always putting a small amount of foods on your kid, of all the foods provided on your kid's plate. Even if it's just like a tiny amount, we're talking like a tablespoon worth, something that's not overwhelming, but gives them an opportunity. And if they eat it and they enjoy it, then they can have more, of course. It can also be helpful to use non-permanent language with likes and dislikes. The saying, oh, I like this, or you don't like this, conveys a sense of permanence. Like it's just a trait, like, oh, your hair is brown, right? It's just something that is. So saying like, oh, you don't like this yet, or, taste change. Those kinds of language can help kids learn that our tastes do change. And just because you don't like it when you're 6 doesn't mean you won't like it when you're 7 or 8 or, 20 for that matter. And being open to that possibility that just because you don't like it now doesn't mean you won't like it later. Something that's a hard habit to break and is so common is to bribe kids to try foods with dessert, right? If you have this, then you can have dessert. I mean, I don't know if I've met a parent who hasn't done that at least once. It's so common. The issue with that is that it teaches our kids that this is the thing that we have to go through to get to this, the good thing, right? Dessert. And it kind of puts dessert and treats on this pedestal, and all the other food that we really do want them to enjoy and is more nutritious for them down, right? It's kind of the punishment before you get the reward. The way we get around that is by having it not be a bribe. Even if your kid doesn't eat their vegetables, it's okay if they have a single serving of dessert. And that's the one place where we put the limit on your child gets to decide how much. With treats and dessert, we put the limit on 1 serving. All other foods, they get to choose how much they want to eat. Right along with that, we don't want to force a clean plate. I think we kind of have heard that messaging now, right? That we don't want to force our kids to be part of the clean plate club. One thing that can encourage kids to sit down at the table and eat and be involved, and also to prevent bribing with dessert, is to actually just serve dessert with meals. One way I like to think about this is, one of my favorite desserts is like warm brownies with ice cream. And if I had a delicious dinner of some of my favorite foods, and then my neighbor came over and brought a warm plate of brownies, it would be very difficult for me not to eat at least a couple. However, if that same neighbor came with that plate of brownies before we had dinner, and I put it on the table right next to some of my other favorite foods like mashed potatoes and grilled asparagus and roasted chicken, if it was right next to those foods, my calculus would kind of change, right? Like, yeah, I really love brownies, but do I love them more than I love even roasted asparagus, which is one of my favorite vegetables? I don't know. It kind of changes. But when we add it on top, when we do it later, we kind of just forget about everything we ate before. So if our kids have this much like that they need to eat, we don't want them to force them to eat all the way to the top during dinner and then add on dessert at the end, because they're going to eat dessert, right? It's just going to happen. What we want to do is to include dessert in this equation so that they can learn to eat until they're full, no matter what they're eating. So that they're willing to say, oh yeah, like I'm done, I'm full, even though maybe there's something else really good. We also want to provide kids a safe way out. So by providing at least one safe food with meals, that gives them, a way out to make sure that they're eating enough and able to grow. But it also can be helpful for some kids to have like a way out that involves spitting out of food, which is not super culturally acceptable. So maybe we don't try this at a restaurant, but at home, having like a no thank you napkin where they can just discreetly spit out something they don't want, they got somewhere. They are doing that learning process of trying that new food. It can take, people like to say lots of different numbers about how many times kids need to try different foods. And it really depends on the kid. Some kids are really easygoing and it takes only a couple of times. And some kids are really stubborn and it can take 50 or 100 exposures to a food. So if your kid puts something in their mouth and then spits it out, you should still count that as a win because they were at least willing to put it in their mouth. And you can say, that's okay, taste change, and just move on. And they'll be more likely to try it again later. And maybe it will be more to their liking. The main takeaways, if you should have any, are that we need to have patience. That it's just a long journey. It's a really long journey to teach your kids how to eat in a way that's competent, where they can have a healthy relationship with food, where they know how to eat in a way that honors their body and honors their hunger and fullness cues and helps them feel good. It's just a long learning process that most of us as adults are even still on. We also really need to trust them, trust their innate ability to grow, and the fact that they will eat as much as they need to. And if we allow them the right environment, they will get what they need to grow. And they won't have deficiencies, that they'll really be okay. I see it over and over again. Often I have parents that are worried about protein because sometimes kids don't like to eat meat or whatnot. And every time I do a diet analysis, unless it's a pretty extreme case, the kid is getting a pretty even mix of macronutrients and sufficient vitamins and minerals. Maybe, yeah, it could be better, and there could be a lot more fruits and vegetables. But as far as, meeting the minimum, most kids are doing just fine and they grow well. So if your kid is not that kid, then that's a little bit of a different conversation. But we do need to trust them that they'll be able to grow and just be as consistent as we can over time. As I'm sure you all know, kids do really well with consistency, having regular meals, having regular snacks, knowing that even if they don't like this and they hate everything and everything is terrible, that there will be another meal later that they can eat. That can go a long way. And just being open and accepting that maybe they don't like these things, or maybe this or that. And over time, that they will really have a more expanded palate and be able to eat a variety of foods, and they'll grow just fine. All right. Does anybody have any questions? Can we open it up, or do you have anything you want to say before we open things up, guys?
I really appreciate all that information. I have a question, and then I know a few of our members had emailed in a few questions also, but just a clarifying question. I've never heard of putting dessert on the table. It's an interesting idea. How closely do you control that situation? Do you just what if they, are they eating a bite of broccoli and then a bite of brownie, or all the brownie and then the broccoli, or do you just...
It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. The only thing that I control is how much. So obviously an adult and an 18-month-old shouldn't get the same portion of dessert, right? So giving the correct portion of the treat to them with their meal, and then allowing them to eat it in whatever order they desire. It really doesn't matter because we know they're going to eat it anyways, right? So why add it on top if they're going to eat it anyways? Is that extra bite of broccoli really going to do them any good?
Mm-hmm.
I would say probably not. And it keeps them at the table. And when you start eating, it's much easier to keep eating. You just getting them to the table and to start putting food in their mouth can be the biggest battle.
Right. Yeah, I'm even thinking about myself, because I love that little sweet after dinner, but is it I think I love that sweet, or because you're right, you're kind of full and you're so I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, you should try it and see what you think. See, maybe you do just really like after dinner.
I know.
That's okay
too. We'll see.
I have a question. Do you have any tips for helping children stay seated at the table? Because during mealtime, my daughter wants to get up and, I've got to go get this, and we sit at the table together and we say it's mealtime, but there's always distractions, and it's always difficult to sit down and have a full meal without bopping up and down out of the table.
Yeah, totally. I have it. Like I said, my 3-year-old, this is a daily thing too. The first thing is to check and see if they are hungry enough. Typically kids who are decently hungry will hopefully stay a little bit longer than kids who are not hungry enough. So making sure that any snacks are had at least an hour before dinner helps make sure that, they have enough hunger to motivate them to stay at the table. The second is just to have age appropriate expectations. And mostly by age appropriate, I mean appropriate for your kid. Some kids are more willing to sit still, and I do not have one of those. Another thing you can do is to set a timer, even if it's just, depending on the age, of course. But just saying, here's a 5-minute timer. We're just going to sit here together for this time. If you don't want to eat, that's okay. Just be here with us. One phrase that we'll use around our house is, does your tummy say you're full? And often she says yes. And then I say, can I eat your food then? And then she'll usually come back to the table because she doesn't want me to eat her food because she's not quite that full. But when she tells me that, yeah, I can eat her food, then that usually tells me that she's actually full and she's actually done. So it is a real struggle though.
Those are good tips. Thank you.
I know. Oh, sorry. Go for it.
No, it's fine. So I have a question about dessert. And in our house, we are not afraid of bribery. So this is like a little bit of a revelation. But we kind of have a system in our house where we do every other night. Mm-hmm. And that way my son has expectations. He does a lot better when he has specific expectations. But do you feel like, including dessert a lot, does that just create a habit to always have dessert? Or do you feel like it gives kids a chance to understand how to moderate?
I err more towards the second one there, like of saying, like I say, if I can't teach my clients and my patients how to eat pizza, then I haven't done my job, right? Because there's going to be pizza. And if every time they see pizza, it's 6 slices later, then they don't really know how to eat. They only know how to eat in a perfect food environment, and that's just not helpful. So I do we do need to include some treats. I really do believe that there needs to be some, and every family can have like their different amounts of what they feel is appropriate. And I'm not going to be the one to say you can have this treat and not that treat, but it is important to learn how to moderate. It really is. Does that answer your question enough?
Yes, thank you.
I know that there was a question sent to me before about snacks for like toddlers, and I'm hoping, if it's okay with you guys, I'll just send you, I have like this little handout about snacks and some ideas I can send to you guys, and you guys can distribute through with the link for the YouTube video or whatever. So
that would be great, because I know that like the unprocessed food snacks, we all run out of ideas, so I think that, especially since you're raising, a toddler yourself. And then another question, I did send this to you also, but introducing, healthy foods at, like, do you have any tips on what age and, what are some of the best practices that, really going in that early eating?
Yeah. So if we're talking about like, around 6 months, when we're starting to introduce foods, we want to just, I'm totally on board with, it's called baby-led weaning, or when kids are, when we kind of skip the baby food stage and we go to soft finger foods. And that is a great stage to introduce a variety of healthy foods, because a lot of them lend themselves really well to that sort of feeding where you do, foods that are about the size of your finger and they're soft and mashable. So that's a great time to do steamed broccoli and roasted vegetables, obviously like soft roasted vegetables. Some cheeses are a great time. That's a great time to introduce different fruits. So I am a fan of that approach, just because it allows kids to kind of get a jump start on learning how to eat foods as the way they're going to be eating them the rest of their lives, right? To start to experiment with those different textures. When kids get a bit older and we're introducing foods, and that, I mean, that can be pretty much from 1 and on, just being really neutral about foods. Think about when someone gave you a gift and they super hyped it up. And they're like, this is going to be so amazing. You're going to love it. It's going to be the best. And you're like, oh, I hope I love it. If I don't love it, I'm going to disappoint them. We don't want to do that to our kids with food, right? You know, even if it's your favorite food and you love it, you don't want to put that pressure on them that they have to love it, or, you know, they're failing you. Some kids, not all kids, but some kids are really sensitive to that pressure. And so just presenting foods neutrally, explaining it for what it is. This is an avocado. This is what it looks like when it's, you know, not cut up. It's green and it's squishy. Mommy really likes it. I hope you like it, you know, but it doesn't need to be a big thing. And then just continuing to introduce foods over and over again. And also don't make a big deal when they try them and they like them. You know, be like, oh, that's great. I'm glad you enjoy it. We don't need it to make it be like this huge festive event, because it's just kind of part of growing, is learning to like new foods. So.
That's really helpful. I love the middle way. I think that's really a great message. Can you give us some insight and some truth about processed foods? Like, you know, are there ingredients to really stay away from, or that are like more addictive? Like, are gushers really bad, or, you know, is it the food coloring, or, you know, granola bars are better, or I don't know, just what like your high level ideas on processed snacks specifically?
So as far as what the research tells us, we know that added sugars definitely contribute to heart disease and diabetes. And so we know that those are ones to avoid. Luckily, food labels have been changed, and so added sugars are now listed on food labels. Previously, it was really tricky. Something that had a lot of fruit was going to be listed as having a lot of sugar, but we know that sugar from fruit doesn't seem to have adverse effects. In fact, fruit is obviously very good for us. But it's those added sugars that cause issues, especially, you know, it's not when they're consumed, you know, it's not this one thing that's the problem. It's when it's consumed chronically over a longer period of time. So by no means should we ever beat ourselves up when it's like, this is what we've got and this is what we're eating. That's really okay. My number one rule is always that it's better to eat than to not eat. If you are hungry, then you should eat. And if the only thing available to you is a Snickers bar, then more power to you, because those are delicious. But if, when we're, you know, talking about trying to modulate things over the long term, looking at added sugars is important. For adults, we want to have less than 25 grams of added sugar a day for female adults. It's kind of an average. So for kids, you can imagine for a 2-year-old, it's going to be a very different number than it is going to be for a 16-year-old. So that's pretty variable. There have been some research that's been coming out that's pretty interesting, that's been showing that like these more highly processed foods, instead of, you know, what was maybe a little bit previously thought, you know, we all knew that they're probably not great for us, but, you know, instead of just thinking like, oh, well, because we're eating those foods, we're not eating healthier foods, or we're not eating foods with fiber. Some research has been showing that these highly processed foods that have a lot of sugar and have a lot of salt do have some kind of qualities that tend to push us to overeat. And they can kind of trick our hunger and fullness cues into pushing us towards eating more than we should. So in that respect, you know, we want to try and eat less processed foods, of course, but I also don't think it should ever be a space for guilt, because once again, it's always better to eat than to not eat. And if that's the option, then you should take it.
I'm curious about when you have 2 kids who have different eating habits. And I'm curious about like I like the idea of like the kitchen is closed, because sometimes I think we do let the kids graze a little bit too much. But how firm are you to like, do you feel like, so our daughter doesn't really, she's 3, she's just never been a big breakfast person. And trying to, have her eat to get out the door. So she goes to her school and then she doesn't have a snack until a certain time. And so I want to make sure that she has enough sustenance in her for her to last. But if she's not really hungry at that time in the morning, what would your recommendation be for like, how do you blend those two together?
And tell me about your other kid real quick.
Oh, so he's 7. He's just, sometimes they get hungry at different times. And so like, he'll eat breakfast. He's great with breakfast. But sometimes he grazes more, like it kind of just, they see each other do things. And so it's like, oh, he's grazing, I'm going to graze. When I like had just gotten her I was just trying to have her, eat a meal 30 minutes before, she wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Once again, your job is actually not to make them eat, which I know we feel like it's our job to make them eat, but it's your job to provide the opportunity for them to eat. So if they choose not to, then that's really okay. And you don't have to, make sure that they have another opportunity before you were planning on it or was scheduled. And it sounds so harsh because eating is such a, like, it's a right, obviously, but schedules are important and consistency is important too. And the more consistent you are, the more consistent that she'll become, and her hunger and fullness will start to regulate to those times, as long as you're providing adequate amounts. So like a 3-year-old needs to have a snack or breakfast for the most part, breakfast, snack, or like we said, a small lunch. And if she doesn't eat, then that's okay. It's not the end of the world. She'll eat when she's hungry.
Okay.
I know it's so easy for me to say it. It's a totally different thing to like actually implement it. And that's why I just said like patience and consistency. Like it doesn't have to be perfect. And if we're getting it like 60% of the time, then like I definitely round up and say that you're totally doing it.
Oh, my husband is totally on your program. He's like, if they don't eat, they don't eat. And if they're hungry, they can go to bed and it's fine. And they've never woken up in the middle of the night saying they're hungry. And I'm like, well, what if they don't get enough to eat? It's like the back and forth. So that's helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
It's stressful. We really do feel like it's our job to have them eat. And if we don't, then we're a failure, but it's our job to provide. So
thank you.
Emily, I have a question for you. So right now, my almost 1-year-old eats pretty much everything. So whatever my husband and I are eating, he eats. At what age do you see that they start to become more picky? And what do you recommend for going through that stage when right now he's literally eating every flavor, every meat, spice, I mean, everything?
It's so fun, isn't it? I just think it's so exciting to watch them like enjoy all these different foods. And you're like, oh my gosh, they're going to love every cuisine in the whole world. Yeah. And then it's about 18 months, plus or minus sometimes that most kids turn to the white and yellow diet and they just want to eat white foods and cheese and stuff like that. And if you think about it, it is a period of growth where they're not really receiving as much, they're probably not nursing as much. And so, or at all. And they're more drawn to safe foods, right? Foods that are consistent, and foods that will reliably give them enough calories. So I think we often think that we're failing or they're failing, but it's just it's a super normal period. And all you can do is continue to offer those different types of foods, that you're eating, and just make sure that there's at least one safe food. As long as you kind of keep doing what you're doing, I would suspect that you will very rarely have times where, like you're making something and he just won't eat any of it. There's usually some sort of starch or something that he'll still eat. And just keep putting a little tiny bit on his plate. Like we're talking like just a little tiny bit. If you think that he's more likely to throw it on the ground or not touch it, but just keep offering it and don't make a big deal of it. And I'm already, it's been really rewarding. I'm already starting to see my almost 3-year-old. There's a period where I was like, I don't think she eats any vegetables reliably. Yeah, no, she doesn't. But we're already kind of starting to move out of that phase where she's, trying asparagus and enjoying it. And it's like, oh, I do like asparagus. They're like, yeah, taste change. So just be patient. and don't feel like it's because you're not offering the wrong things or any of those. It's just a super normal developmental stage. Fruits and vegetables, especially if you think about like goldfish crackers, every single goldfish tastes the same. But with blueberries, every blueberry tastes a little bit different. And, that's a totally different way, when you can have something that's super reliable or something that's kind of pretty variable, which one are you going to choose? Well, when you're 2 or 18 months, it's probably going to be the thing that's super reliable every time. And so learning to be okay with that variety and that variability it's just a skill.
That's a great question, Allie. I had often thought, like, if you never give your kid, my kid, like, I have teenagers now, so I'm past the window, but I thought if they never had mac and cheese, could I have skipped it? But it sounds like developmentally, they just are drawn to different, foods that are safe. So
it would have been something else. It would have been rice or, like it would have just been something else.
Yeah.
Emily, what would be if you do, so my kids most times live off of bars and pouches, which are a consistency thing, I think. What if there was one thing that is like your grab and go must have in your diaper bag or in your backpack for a hungry kid that you would say is a nutritious option that is a packaged food? What would you suggest would be like your top pick of something?
It kind of depends on if we care about price or not. Lara bars are definitely my go-to. But they're definitely on the more expensive side of food, right? Like you're paying like $1 or $2 per bar, which is a lot when your kid throws away half of it. But I do find that my toddler does like them. Applesauce pouches. Goldfish crackers are not the worst things in the world as far as crackers go. Those are kind of my go-to. We also, sometimes you just need kind of a carbohydrate rich pick-me-up. And I like the fruit bars from Costco, I'm sure they have them at other places other than Costco, but the whole fruit bars or other dried fruits. Like we like dried apples and like the dried banana nubs. And I would also be lying if I said that fruit snacks aren't a regular, like I think kind of the same thing about fruit snacks sometimes as you probably do about mac and cheese, where it's just like, if I never gave her fruit snacks, would she want them every day? And it would, like I said, it would just be something else probably. So yeah, fruit snacks get us through some rough situations sometimes. And, I feel okay about it.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you.
We have time for one more question if anyone has one. This has been so helpful.
Doesn't look like anything else has come through on the chat. So if there are no other questions, I think we will. Oh, Allie, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I was going to ask another question. Sorry for all of the questions.
No.
In terms of, because now he eats his lunch at daycare every day. He's 1-year-old. Like when you think of your ideal 1-year-old or daycare lunch, what does that look like to you?
Like one that the daycare provides, or one that you?
Well, we would send lunch. So what do you recommend as like a well-balanced lunch for a 1-year-old to send to school?
So my general rule with meals is that it should have at least 3 different food groups. So having at least a fruit is a good place to start. I mean, when they're 1, that's probably going to be applesauce, right? Because it's not a choking hazard. I mean, if it was my daughter, it would probably be an applesauce, a cheese of some sort, like a cheese stick or something. And then, maybe like a peanut butter and banana sandwich or something like that, so some sort of carbohydrate source, something that has some protein and fat, and a fruit would kind of be the route I would take. And like I said, my goal is 3 different food groups. So just trying to kind of hit all of those usually means that you have something that's well-rounded enough that, you can feel like this is nutritious, this is well balanced.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, I think one of the things that we've learned from tonight is something that you said, is just to kind of accept where you are and have patience and faith and understanding. And we thank you so much for your time tonight. And thank you everybody so much for joining us at Hive. And as Sarah mentioned, we will have Lizette next month for May for mental health awareness. And we're really trying to highlight maternal mental health during that time. But thank you so much to Emily for coming in and sharing your expertise as a professional and a mom. And we will absolutely all implement so many of these strategies. I know we're all going to be thinking about you for many months to come at dinner time and snack time. And I think one of the most beautiful things is really giving ourselves a little grace as parents, because I think especially in the food game, we do tend to be very self-critical sometimes, and thinking that it is our job to really make sure they get enough nutrients, at least from my end. So thank you for giving me a little bit more leeway and grace with that. And we will be sending out anything that you provide to us for references and resources to our email list. And if you have any, we'll be sending out your contact information as well. And we just want to say on behalf of Hive, thank you so much for joining us for the speaker series. And we hope to see all your families out and about in Park City outside, as well as at our future events. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a good night.
Thanks, Emily.